Welcome to CFTC Talks. I'm your host, Andy Bush, Chief Market Intelligence Officer for the CFTC. Hey, just a quick reminder, as always, there's a disclaimer at the end of the show that's important for you to hear. For those of you just joining us for the first time, the purpose of CFTC Talks is to provide information about commodity markets and futures trading and other information about conditions in this country and abroad that affect markets, including things like market structure, dynamics, and liquidity. Now, we do this via talking with a wide range of experts in many fields. We've had really great people on, like Nobel Prize winner Bob Shiller, the IMF's Fabio Natalucci, and Dallas Federal Reserve President Rob Kaplan. So today we bring back a previous guest in the fintech and regtech space, CFTC Chief Innovation Officer Daniel Gorfine. Daniel, welcome back to CFTC Talks.
It's great to be back with you, Andy, and that's quite a list of names you just rattled off, so I'm humbled.
It's an august list that both you and I we feel better just knowing that they've been on the show. Whether or not we can contribute in the same fashion, we can only hope and aspire to be to those levels.
We'll do our best.
And, you know, we had you on several shows. A couple of my favorites were the Andreessen Horowitz show. I think that was 27 with Alex Rampell, and number 43 with FCA's Nick Cook. But, of course, you reminded me, and I almost forgot because we had so many people on that show, the Bitcoin Roundtable, and that was a blast too. I hope you enjoyed that.
It was an interesting time, and it was a great discussion with my colleagues here at the CFTC. Yeah.
Well, we're almost a year since that time, so we're going to get into that. And I think it's been a great chance right now to catch up with you on what you've been doing recently, and really to look back over the year for lessons learned, and then look forward into 2019. And you know, I realize, as I just mentioned, that this time last year, it was all Bitcoin all the time in the fintech universe and cryptocurrencies. So I guess the first question is, you know, it's kind of a layup here, but how do you view the changing fates of these new financial products?
Yeah, it's been quite a year in the crypto space, as you say, or the crypto universe. So, you know, I think if we reflect back on what we've seen, we certainly went through a period of, I think at the end of last year into the beginning of this year, that looked like a bit of a hype cycle and a bit of a mania. I think, you know, my own personal view of the space is that there is real innovation underpinning the development of cryptocurrencies, crypto assets, and there are some really fascinating computer science solves to traditional problems that has come out of this period. You know, but that being said, when you look at crypto as a broader asset class, there is going to come a time, and I think that time seems to be now, where they really need to demonstrate actual utility and application in the real world and in the economy. Yeah. Whether the application is payments, can you really scale a payment-based solution, as many people believed that crypto would be able to do in the early days? Can you actually use it for certain utility purposes or to consume goods and services? And I think, you know, the answer is pretty binary there. Projects are either going to succeed or projects are going to fail. I think regardless of what happens with specific projects, I do believe, and we'll probably get into this more in the program, but I think a lot of the technology will morph into other areas of the economy, and maybe in the way that we do trading, maybe in the way that we more efficiently do economic transactions. So I think we're going to glean a lot out of the technology that will continue to have an impact in broader markets and in real economic activity.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's, as I always like to say, to some extent, it's not our job to figure out if these are going to work or not. It's really just to get our heads around the technology and understand the dispersion of that and how that changes things like the structure of the financial markets and maybe the structure of business overall, depending on which financial technology or technology we're talking about. But before we get to that,
yeah, we could dive there quickly.
I mean, that is like, yeah, well, let's go down that rabbit hole in a second. Let's get into a little bit of what you've been doing over the last year. Give me your, I know this is hard, but give me your top three takeaways from Lab CFTC in the office hours you've been holding.
Yeah, it's been a great year. It's been an incredibly busy year for Lab CFTC. And I guess, you know, thinking back to what are some of the big takeaways from 2018. Number one, I think, is around, you know, demand for engagement with regulators. So that was one of the open questions when we developed the initiative starting back in 2017. There was an idea that we need to be getting out of Washington, going and meeting with innovators around the country to hear their thoughts, questions, learn about what they're working on. And it was an open question. Would there be demand to actually come talk to us? And I think the answer has been a resounding yes. I mean, we've had, and I believe now we should be well over 250 meetings with innovators over the last year plus.
That's great.
And when we say innovators too, it really truly is, it could be a startup. It could be an established financial institution. It could be a technology company. I think that's what heartens me is how much innovation is taking place in the economy, whether it be a startup or an established entity. And it's incredible too, like the diversity of businesses, maturity of businesses, topics that they raise. And then, by the way, we also have universities that we've been able to engage with, other domestic and international regulators. So I guess the bottom line is, the notion that you have an open door to have engagement at the front end of developing new business models and concepts has been very well received in the market. So I think that's my number one takeaway. A second, which is, part of our mission at Lab CFTC is really to identify opportunities created by technologies, as well as emerging challenges and risks. And I think my takeaway has been that if I had to identify one risk, it's actually a broad lack of technological literacy across the board. And, I question, you ask yourself, do senior leaders, whether it's in government, business, do senior leaders really understand the core technologies that are powering and driving new business models?
Yeah.
And I think it's critically important that we have that baseline understanding, or at least know enough to ask difficult questions of a chief technology officer to be able to say at a company, do we have the right protections in place? Do we understand the redundancies that are built into our systems? Because if not, I worry about tech failure causing a problem and us across the board just not having the right leadership understanding of those technologies to be able to mitigate that or solve for it at the outset. I guess, my last takeaway from the year, and it kind of ties to what I just mentioned, demand for engagement, the need for technological literacy. I think an incredibly positive development is that you're seeing now in the U.S., I believe it's true to say across every federal financial regulator, they've either developed or are in the process of developing an office, a program, an initiative around technology and innovation engagement. And I think that's so important because at the end of the day, if you don't have a dedicated stakeholder within a federal financial regulator that thinks about the future, how is technology impacting our markets? How is our world going to change? What are the opportunities and what are the emerging risks and challenges? You may not have that stakeholder that's focused on doing that on a day-to-day basis. And I think given the need for tech literacy, given the speed of change in the markets and how quickly innovation is both impacting and then scaling in the economy, I think it's critical to have that model. So I think we're really pleased that from a Lab CFTC perspective, we've been a big voice in that conversation domestically and internationally. And I think we're helping to develop a model or a blueprint for how you do this within a regulatory body.
And that is fantastic. And let me just unpack a couple of thoughts from that as I'm sitting here and I've gone out and, first of all, I've had a chance to sit into a couple of the Lab CFTC office hours in New York. That was great. It was like, ladies and gentlemen, it was like speed dating, but like at a really high level. So it was a little mind-boggling. But to your point about the engagement, I think as an agency, as we've moved from analog to digital, and actually as the entire world has moved that way, it really is so incumbent about taking a step back and go, we're really smart, right? We kind of get this stuff, but boy, are we so much smarter if we engage everybody else that's in the community with their knowledge bases to help us. And I think, I don't know, I humbly put this forward that if you take that approach, people want to help each other overall. And I think that's what we've really seen, whether it's through your office or my office, throughout the United States government. You don't hear a lot about this stuff, and I don't want to beat that drum too much. But really, beneath a lot of the crazy headlines that are out there, there's really good things that are going on where we're trying to understand this world because it does matter. The structures that are out there are changing rapidly, and we need to stay on top of them. Maybe sometimes it is to put guardrails up, but maybe sometimes it's to open up the guardrails so people can teach us like what they're doing. And I think that's what's been so great about your work and being here at that time. And I do think your point about within organizations that whether it's the federal government or a bank or a business overall. E-commerce has really changed the nature of those businesses overall, but because of these new new technological breakthroughs to some extent, you really need to spend and have a group of people that are really engaged in that to help leadership understand it. Because you don't necessarily need to have those skill sets as a leader. You just need to know that you need those people and that you can engage and ask meaningful questions.
I think that's totally right. And knowing enough, I mean, you're right that everybody can't be a technologist, but you need to be able to drill down enough layers deep in the onion so that you know the right questions to ask, and you can at least vet whether what you're hearing back is making sense.
Yeah.
You got to be able to pressure test and ask those questions, because if not, then you really are just highly reliant that you have the right person in place, and you don't really know if the answer is yes or no. So that is important.
It can be really tricky. So to that end, right, since we're educating here, right, and we're advocating that leadership know this kind of stuff, help leadership from that standpoint. What are the top 3 trends that you've seen develop through the 250 meetings that you had?
Yeah, so and this is another thing, and I was thinking about it when you were mentioning how important it is to actually engage with people. Look, you learn a lot by talking to people.
Yep.
And a one-off.
You can only learn so much from texting and emailing.
No, that's right. Face-to-face conversations really is still very valuable. Yeah. And I also think that you need to you glean a lot from multiple conversations, and you start to learn to discern like what's real, what's some puffery, what's actually smoke and mirrors versus what's really impacting the economy. And so here's my big takeaway, and I'm gonna start by throwing out all of these buzzwords of the day. Okay, so we talk about blockchain and DLT and smart contracts and cloud and machine learning and AI, and I mean, gosh, like everyone knows, like you throw those out there, and I actually heard Prime Minister Modi of India at the Singapore FinTech Festival said something along the lines of, if you're trying to raise money from a venture capitalist, say you're doing FinTech. If you want to get all their money, say that it involves blockchain. So anyway, but let me actually say what I think is real about those buzzwords. And that is, if I were to pull together all that we've heard over the last 18 months, I think we're kind of at the next phase or the next leap in general computing infrastructure. And let me unpack that for a second.
All right.
So we have interconnected computers. That's what the internet provided, right? We can connect systems. But what has emerged in the kind of the original era after the internet is you have a lot of bespoke, customized systems and databases that run on various computers that are not necessarily interoperable.
Right.
So if you go to a large bank, they're going to have multiple different divisions, and each division has created kind of a scotch-taped and bubble-gummed database that serves the particular purpose they need for that division. But that database may not communicate with the other database within the actual bank itself, not to mention the broader kind of interconnected computer systems that exist in an economy. So what has blockchain and Bitcoin done? Well, what it did is made people think about interoperable databases and standardizing data formats and fields. And it made that topic somehow a sexy, interesting topic, which is funny, right?
That is astonishing, really, if you think about it.
It is. I mean, we're talking about like back office ledger systems being interoperable. But guess what? There's a lot of power in that. Why? Because when you create interoperable systems that have standardized data formats and fields, you start creating cleaner structured data. Now enter cloud. Cloud just means you have kind of an elastic supply of storage. So you can take all of that data, and by the way, I'm going to add an extra buzzword here, the Internet of Things, right? You have smart devices that are feeding potentially clean structured data into likely cloud repositories, these data lakes. So now you've got good data that you can really scale up in the cloud. Now, what can you do with that clean, structured data? This is where you enter kind of data analytics and machine learning tools. They can consume the clean, structured data and actually yield real predictions, real insights, actionable information. That allows you to start automating more processes, drives greater efficiencies in transactions, and then that drives you to things like smart contracts, which I know we'll talk about more, but that's part of this idea of automation. If you have good data that you can feed into code, you can actually self-execute systems. So all of this collectively, to me, is kind of the next generation of computing infrastructure. I think it's allowing computer systems to speak to each other in a clearer, cleaner way with less friction, which I do think is going to drive a lot more automation in the economy. I think it's going to drive a lot more efficiency gains. So all of this stuff when pooled together, that's my big takeaway. It's computing infrastructure, which may allow the internet to kind of live up to even more of the expectations that people had when it was first launched.
Yeah, and I concur. And I think that's the power of it, right? There's so much nonsense and chaos around so many of the terms that you mentioned. But I think if you distill it down, you did a great job of doing that, because I think what everybody's trying to do is like, hey, as a business, like we see reams of data come in. Can we make sense of it?
Right.
And that's really it's this massive ability to create the data, and then you need it to really. Data creation is not the problem. Data creation is
we
fine.
have tons of data, but can you do anything with it? Right?
It's got to be usable, right?
Right.
And when you talk about interoperability, you're just talking about systems being able to work together. I think at the bare minimum, those terms, blockchain and those other things, if they've caused people to rethink their data systems, hallelujah, right? That is a very, very good thing. And one of the outcomes I think that came from that is, and I think what is emblematic of some of the things you're talking about is, of course, the great romaine lettuce scare of Thanksgiving and all the people that were sickened, but the blanket recall of romaine lettuce and how expensive that is. And really, and I understand why it was done, but it does have a dampening effect, just like we had with the previous spinach recall. People stopped consuming that product. Now, what's interesting to me in blockchain, of course, is what Walmart's done. And I'd just like to give your thoughts on this, because it's my understanding with Walmart that they have mandated certain products, food products, lettuce in particular, to go on their blockchain, and therefore their ability to see exactly where that product flows from and being able to be more granular about where it's located really aids them if there is a recall, especially if they can find out which states and maybe some of the producers of it. It seems to me that's an ideal outcome or an ideal use of that product. Yeah,
and Andy, look, I know you get to travel around a lot too, and we've had a few really interesting conversations about applications of DLT or distributed ledger technology. So let me just first say one point on that. When you think about distributed ledger technology and blockchain, I think there's a lot of conflation of terminology. There's a spectrum of activity that's taking place within kind of this DLT universe. On the one hand, you have these private permissioned interoperable systems and call them interoperable databases. On the other end of the spectrum, when you open up these systems to the public and you need ways to actually verify and validate, that's where you enter the world of open public blockchains with crypto typically associated. That serves as the incentive, right, for people to participate and maintain a ledger. But be that as it may, there's all kinds of activity taking place along this spectrum. You're identifying some really interesting use cases or applications of permissioned systems, like in the supply chain tracking context. And again, this goes back to the statement I made where I said Bitcoin made it interesting to talk about back office systems and ledgers and tracking. But yeah, we have the ability, and we've actually had the ability for a long time, to create database systems that can feed information in. You have a QR code or a barcode scanner on produce or ag products, other ag products, commodities, to be able to track them, as you'll hear said in the context of Walmart, from farm to table. Right. Yeah, you can scan this information in. It can be captured in a broader system, a database that many may have permissions to be able to access and see. And you can actually track that produce, in this example that you're giving, all the way through to the grocery store. And so that's a system where, yes, if there's a recall, if there's a problem, you should be able to more readily track it and be able to pull it out of the food supply. So that's kind of what I was getting at the very outset when we were talking about crypto, and I said you'll see some of the technology more for kind of impact or evolve in other areas. I think it's coming from this kind of collective and creative thinking about what can you do if you create better infrastructure, back office infrastructure, what efficiencies can that drive? And they're very real. They may not be revolutionary, Right. Like we're talking about kind of in the public blockchain space, but they're certainly evolutionary, and that shouldn't be understated because that can drive a lot of benefits for the broader economy.
Yeah, and I know there's criticism of the permission blockchain saying, look, you've done all the work to herd all the cats together to get in agreements between who's going to do what. So, like, why would you need a blockchain? But on the other hand, I think there's as you mentioned, there's very specific applications of this, and it is evolving technology. The thing that's exciting to me about it, and don't want to get too geeked up on this stuff, but
we never do that.
No,
Andy.
Of course not. But is the fact that it is evolving, and we don't know where it's going to go per se, but we know the direction that it's heading in. We see the trend in the changes, but what people are doing with it, and to me that's very exciting. And it is difficult to stay on top of some of this stuff because you get differences of opinion on where things are happening. But to me, as I look into this universe, I just see so many investments going into the space from a wide range of people, whether it's regtech, fintech, agtech, you name it. I mean, across every business sector. To me, that's where things get super exciting because then you can become more efficient, and not only become more efficient, but more productive. I mean, we start thinking about farms and how the way that they operate, they've become so much more adept at knowing how to fertilize and using drones. And I mean, I don't want to go down too far things, but that's actually, that's the thing that's so cool about it.
I think you're totally right. I mean, that gets you into we talk about Internet of Things, and with being able to kind of measure weather patterns, soil conditions, feed that into
temperatures,
structured data in the cloud, building analytics tools on top of that. That's pretty interesting and exciting stuff. So I totally agree.
And then you have higher yields, and you have more people fed around the world, and maybe you can reduce global poverty. I mean, there's just some really cool things that come from that.
Yep.
I mean, it's not just a nascent technology looking, for a problem to solve. I mean, there's problems that are there that this can help with. So let me segue a little bit out of that. I'm pulling it back. I'm Alice coming back out of the rabbit hole here, but I do want to talk a little bit about something that you and I kind of share together, a kindred soul when it comes to conferences and creating conferences for the agency. You just had your first ever fintech conference, and maybe just briefly tell us, what was that like, and what was the idea that drove that?
Yeah, that was very exciting. So in October, CFTC held its first ever FinTech Forward conference. So Lab CFTC partnered with our Office of Customer Education and Outreach to help convene this 2-day event. And it was here in Washington at our headquarters. We ended up with 8 substantive panels on a range of topics, including crypto, tokenization, machine learning, regtech, and focusing on kind of emerging frauds and schemes of that nature, where, again, we benefited from our colleagues in our Office of Customer Education and Outreach. We had a number of excellent keynote speakers, including the president of the German regulator. Chairman Giancarlo provided the opening remarks and helped us set the context of how we should think about these emerging technologies. So it was wonderful. And, it really drove, again, part of the mission of Lab CFTC is to facilitate market-enhancing innovation. Mm-hmm. And back to that whole thing about the human connection matters, bringing actual people together for face-to-face conferences and convenings like that, I think is really powerful in showcasing what technologies can do, what are some of the applications and benefits, and that can help to stimulate further activity. So we view that as really important, obviously a big educational component as well. We're a regulator. We're here to identify as well emerging risks and challenges, and that's something that we're able to do to help educate the general public. So it was very well received, a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm around it, and we're looking forward to doing another similar FinTech Forward conference in 2019.
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, full disclosure, I'm being a little disingenuous. I attended it, and I grabbed as many of those people as I could and had them on the podcast, as you know, because I've just been doing a string of these people. But I mean,
well, that's the facilitating market-enhancing innovation, and it was great that you're able to do that.
Well, and I think it helps distribute the knowledge out, especially on the fraud stuff. I obviously you had a great cyber expert come in, and Andre McGregor, and he was fantastic. I learned a lot myself in some of the comments he made, especially about having a password that's only 8 characters long and saying, essentially, if that's all you have, you've been hacked already.
Yeah, it's like that's like the scene in Spaceballs where they say that his password for his luggage was 1234, and then he'd say like, "Oh, I got to go change my password anyway." So yes, that was kind of my moment there when he said that.
I know, it's great. So I mean, ladies and gentlemen, you can find it on our website for sure. I've been promoting it quite a bit. You also not only because you've been busy with that, but also your team put out a let me also say that on our website, we have a lot of great information. We have a lot of great information on Bitcoin and virtual currencies. And one of the things you just recently put out is a primer on smart contracts. So just talk real quickly about that.
Yeah, so quickly, this is the second primer that Lab CFTC has put out. The first one was on virtual currencies. This one was a deep dive into the topic of smart contracts. And we're going to follow that same primer format where the first portion is, what is the technology? What is the innovation and its application? How may it be relevant to CFTC markets or our jurisdiction? And third, what are some of the emerging risks and challenges? And so we did exactly that with the topic of smart contracts. I encourage folks to check it out. I think it's a good educational primer that really does focus in on what smart contracts could represent, which I really think is kind of further automation of functions within our markets or the economy. We talk a little bit about how just coding something, just because something's done in code doesn't mean it's not an actual contract or perhaps even a regulated contract.
Right.
So kind of a cautionary note there that just because you tokenize or write something in computer code doesn't mean that it's not subject to regulation.
Exactly. Things are evolving, ladies and gentlemen.
That's right. That's right.
Keep up.
That's right. And then we just talk about some of the things that folks need to think about, some of the challenges around governance of smart contracts. These are self-executing agreements essentially. So what happens if it doesn't go according to plan, or if you want to be able to roll back something that's already been executed?
Right.
Those are some of the concerns that we would have. Things like oracles, like you're actually accessing third-party information that the smart contract uses to execute. So, maybe it's a contract built around weather temperatures, and you're pulling from the National Weather Service to see what the actual temperatures are before a contract would execute, maybe and make an insurance payment if there's a freeze. But again, what's the integrity of the actual oracle, the third-party information source? Those are the types of things that we encourage people to think about.
And to that point, I mean, what I really liked about that insurance example is in the sense of, I know some people are thinking like, what? Smart contracts? But here's how it plays out. Why does that matter? Because if you're a farmer and you have a smart contract with your insurance company for payments during a freeze, right, and you have that protection, and then the freeze happens, the smart contract execute, you get those payments so much faster.
Yep, speed.
And that is like for farmers, it's super helpful to protect them so that they don't go without those financial payments.
Speed and certainty of execution is a huge potential benefit.
Right, exactly. So I think that's what's really great, and that's on the site, on the website, in the same kind of place as the Bitcoin stuff, right?
Yeah, that's right. So you can go to the CFTC webpage. Then there's a specific Lab CFTC page as well that has our primers and other information there. So it's all available on the website.
Okay, and that's cftc.gov, just in case you're wondering. Let's talk about 2019.
We're almost there. It's incredible.
It is. It has been so crazy. This year has been moving at a light speed. I know everybody says as you get older, things move faster. It actually does happen that way because I've gotten older quickly. But what are the top 3 areas of focus for you and your team, like going forward into next year? Like I know it's hard to predict the future, but let's try to do that a little bit right now. What are you going to focus on?
So, it's always good asking yourself that question heading into a new year. What are the kind of goals and objectives? And I would say the first thing that we will not lose sight of is the importance of engagement. And I think that we've kind of hit that point multiple times during our discussion today, but we need to keep learning. And I think that's really important. And let me put a little bit finer touch on that. When we put out our primer on virtual currencies in October of last year, it was still a fairly novel topic, at least in Washington, right? So there was a steep learning curve. Mm-hmm. I think it's impressive how much people, really understand now more about that technology. Certainly in Washington, amongst regulators, there's a pretty advanced understanding of the underlying tech. So I think it's important for something like Lab CFTC to say, okay, let's make sure we're moving on and keeping our eye on the future. What's next? Where are new things? So I think what you've been seeing over the last few months, and I think will be topics into 2019, are things like stable coins that are trying to solve for some of the volatility concerns with existing cryptos. You're hearing a lot of talk about anonymity coins and some of the challenges that they present from an anti-money laundering and know your customer perspective. I think machine learning is going to be a very big topic. The reality is we're seeing, and that's a whole other program, but we're seeing some real breakthroughs in terms of approaches to machine learning that I think are creating a real opportunity for the first time to start doing some things with machines that would kind of get us past a period of just kind of automation. Like we've been in this RPA, robotic process automation, where we're just trying to automate manual functions, but can we get further in terms of insights and real predictions? I think we might start to see some of that. So engagement, I'm sure it'll be engagement on those topics. We talked earlier this year about innovation competitions. Lab CFTC is hoping to execute, ideally in the first half of next year, on an innovation competition to help stimulate activity in our area. Chairman Giancarlo gave an incredibly, I think, comprehensive speech and a great speech at Georgetown's FinTech Week a few weeks back, talking about the need for CFTC to evolve as a quantitative regulator. And it really ties to that topic of machine learning and data. Are we deploying the best of technologies? And so to the extent that Lab CFTC can help inform some of that process and the technology strategy, I think that will be a big area for us. And then finally, more primers. It could be on some of the topics we've just kind of covered, but I think that these primers are a great way to engage in an ongoing dialogue with innovators, with the broader markets, and kind of share where our thinking is, and hopefully help educate as to how our rules could apply to particular activities. So that's a really important regulatory tool as well. So we've got an ambitious plan for 2019.
That sounds good. Well, and obviously you're going to do another conference, right?
And I didn't even mention the conference there. Yes,
yeah, right.
So no rest for the weary, I guess is what they're saying.
Well, what'll be nice for the conference too is that you'll have the ability to go through a lot of the things that you're looking at and get the experts to come in and really get into more detail and pick their brains, right? And so you got a whole nother year picking people's brains, and that's pretty exciting.
It's a lot of fun.
All right, Daniel Gorfine, Chief Innovation Officer for the CFTC. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Andy. It's been a pleasure.
All right, that's it from me. I just want to say, taking a step back, it's been a great year, and I am super appreciative of everyone who has appeared on the show this year, and of course, to you, all of our listeners. We have over 76,000 downloads in over 100 countries, so thank you for your support. And for all that celebrate, I wish everybody a happy holidays, because that's where we're at. It's December, holy smokes. So safe travels, and may 2019 be a great year for you. I'm Andy Bush, Chief Market Intelligence Officer for the CFTC. This has been CFTC Talks. But wait, we're not done yet. It's time for a disclaimer. The CFTC is providing this information as a public service, and it is neither a legal interpretation nor a statement of CFTC policy. Reference to any specific product, service, trademark, manufacturer, or service provider does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by the CFTC. The CFTC is not liable to any consumer or any third party for any direct, indirect, incidental, consequential, special, or exemplary damages or lost profit related to the use of the information provided or referenced in this podcast. Selection of guests on the podcast does not imply an endorsement of any particular individual or entity. Many individuals and entities provide similar services to those of the guests. The views and opinions expressed by the guests in the podcast are their own and not specifically endorsed by the CFTC. Moreover, the information provided in this podcast should not be construed as investment advice. Consumers should rely on their own inquiries as to accuracy and relevance of the information incorporated or referenced in this podcast and assume the entire risk related to its use. The CFTC is providing its interpretation of market trends solely to inform the public of a framework for projecting possible outcomes under different scenarios. If you have any questions concerning the meaning or application of a particular law or rule administered by the CFTC, please consult an attorney.